but providing the oil and gas and other refined products that we need in order to keep our economy growing. So this pipeline is not a threat to the environment because we have adequate safeguards in place and have for a long, long time. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S. 1813, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 311, S. 1813, a bill to reauthorize federal aid highway and highway safety construction programs and for other purposes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to follow up on the comments of my friend, the senator from Texas, on an issue that we will be voting on this afternoon, I understand, regarding the construction of the so-called Keystone Pipeline. Mr. President, I've been somewhat frustrated by the debate around this issue, and unfortunately, I think we are going to be confronted again with kind of a bifurcated choice here that doesn't get to the possibility of us actually putting in place a comprehensive energy policy that will remove this nation's dependence upon foreign oil, start to look at the ability over the longer haul to bring down the price at the pump, and to make sure that we are truly a participant in the opportunities of a glowing, multifaceted energy policy going forward. And, Mr. President, I support the construction of a Keystone Pipeline. I believe that we need to have an energy policy that has an all-of-the-above approach. I do believe there are appropriate regulatory reviews that need to be made, and I frankly think that any construction of a Keystone Pipeline should take into consideration the very serious environmental considerations that particularly affect the state of Nebraska. And there will need to be a route for this pipeline that would avoid that potential environmental damage. However, because the way this process is being laid out, I will not be voting for the Keystone Amendment today, because by making this a straight up or down issue without taking advantage of the opportunity to put together the beginnings of an energy package, we're missing on a great opportunity. As I've mentioned, if we are truly serious about energy security, and if we are truly serious about reducing our dependence on foreign oil, I believe we need an energy policy that has an all-of-the-above approach. Yes, that means more domestic oil and gas. But it means that when we have an opportunity of an issue of controversy like this regarding Keystone, that we could have taken this opportunity to include a rational approach with appropriate environmental reviews to get to I believe, a positive answer on Keystone, but also link that with other energy policies that would make sense. I know the presiding officer has got in his state a number of wind facilities and solar facilities. Unfortunately, those areas that need as well to be part of our energy mix, the tax treatment that allows those projects to move forward have been put in limbo because of the failure of Congress to extend the so-called tax provisions, the tax extenders, on a going-forward basis. So wind projects all across the country. Matter of fact, I was just visiting with some folks right before this coming to the floor, where they have a variety of wind projects that are stopped dead in their tracks because of the uncertainty regarding whether Congress will act. The ability to get a Keystone Energy Pipeline passed in combination with passing as well the extension of these appropriate renewable energy tax credits, I think could have built the kind of bipartisan consensus around energy policy that would be needed. I also believe that one of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of how we save and can have a rational energy policy in this country means a much greater involvement with energy conservation. There is a very strong bipartisan energy conservation bill, the Shaheen-Portman bill, that could have been included in this package as well. I think if we're going to get serious about reducing our dependence on foreign oil, if we're going to make sure that we give the American taxpayers a vision that in the future we're going to see the ability to reduce our dependence upon, again, foreign oil that results in higher gas prices, we actually could have put together around this Keystone proposal a true compromise, bipartisan consensus that would have included construction of Keystone with the appropriate environmental reviews, with the making sure that those key areas of Nebraska are protected, inclusion of the energy tax cuts and tax provisions that we do on an annual basis that would continue to allow wind and solar and other renewable energy construction and production to continue in this country, and a meaningful energy conservation bill, the Shaheen-Portman bill, a bipartisan bill. Those three policies linked together, I believe, would have resulted in a vote that would have been overwhelmingly bipartisan, that would have been a demonstration to the American people that we're going to kind of get out of our respective foxholes and put a beginnings of a truly energy comprehensive policy in place. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have that happen. We're going to have a straight up and down vote on Keystone that dismisses any of the appropriate review process, that doesn't bring in the issues around the so-called energy tax extenders or the conservation bipartisan legislation that was put together by Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman, and instead of getting a more comprehensive vote this afternoon that I believe would have passed overwhelmingly, we're going to end up with one more vote that's going to, for the most part, break down on partisan lines. So I'm disappointed in that. I do believe that we need the construction of the Keystone Pipeline. I do believe we need meaningful energy conservation legislation. I do believe we need meaningful tax policy that promotes renewable energies around solar, wind, biomass, and that unfortunately we're going to have missed the opportunity today to send that strong signal of comprehensive, all-of-the-above energy policy that would actually move this nation forward. So I know my friend, the senator from Texas, is no longer here. I would have loved to have been able to support a package that would be comprehensive, that would have allowed the Keystone effort to move forward in conjunction with these other efforts. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Perhaps later in the year or on a future debate, we'll have that ability to cobble together something that includes more of a all-of-the-above energy policy, and we can actually get about the business of making sure we've got a national energy policy that includes all of the above, because there is no silver bullet on this. We were going to need to make sure we take advantage of all the potential energy resources that we have in this country. Oil and gas, offshore oil, with appropriate revenue sharing for states like mine, Virginia, nuclear, but energy conservation, renewables as well, and the sooner we get to that kind of debate, the sooner we can build the kind of bipartisan coalitions that will allow that kind of policy to move forward. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
both Senator Warner and Senator Cornyn of Texas talking about the Keystone XL pipeline. And there will be at least two amendments to the transportation bill that deal with the Keystone Pipeline. One is the amendment by John Hoeven, Senator of North Dakota, that would approve the pipeline. Another by Ron Wyden of Oregon would call for the use of U.S. iron, steel, and manufactured goods in its construction. Those are just a couple of the 30 or so amendments expected to be debated and voted on beginning later today, sometime after 2:15, we expect, as the Senate moves forward on the transportation bill. Writing about that, Congressional Quarterly today said that the Majority Leader Harry Reid announced the agreement late Wednesday that should pave the way for Senate passage of the $109 billion highway bill. They write that under the agreement, there could be floor votes on 30 amendments to the two-year surface transportation bill, starting with a series of votes on contentious, non-germane amendments today. They also write that a senior Democratic aide said there could be about 10 amendment votes before the Senate finishes work for the week. That's from CQ today. So look for debate beginning now and vote starting sometime this afternoon. The House is in today. They are finishing up work today on a bill that makes it easier for small and mid-sized companies to get financial backing, to get capital, and we expect votes in the House sometime mid-morning today. You can follow the House on our companion network, C-SPAN.
Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to end the quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, Mr. President, I now call up my amendment number 1535, which is at the desk, and I ask that it be reported by number.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Vitter, proposes amendment number 1535.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, amendment number 1535, the Vitter amendment, is very simple and straightforward, and it goes to an awfully important issue. It goes to the issue of the price of energy, particularly the price of gasoline at the pump. And this amendment will be a vote today, Mr. President. In fact, it will be the first vote we take this afternoon. The amendment is very simple. It would allow us to go back to the previous lease plan for the outer continental shelf, replacing the current Obama administration lease plan, which cuts that previous plan in half, moves us in the wrong direction in terms of producing our abundance of domestic energy, including oil and natural gas. Mr. President, everybody is concerned about the rising price at the pump. It is on the rise again. It's significantly increasing, and that hits middle and lower class families right in their pocketbook, right where it hurts, and it's particularly harmful in a down economy. We're struggling to get out of this past recession. We're trying to mount a recovery. We're trying to make positive things happen, and these increasing prices at the pump are hitting at the worst time possible. Now, what do we do about it? Well, there are a lot of things we can do, but certainly increasing supply, including domestic supply, is one major positive thing we can do. 88% of the price of an average gallon of gasoline is attributable to the cost of crude oil and taxes. 88%. That only leaves 12% that is refining, marketing, and distribution. And by the way, that 12% also includes the compliant costs for a host of mandates required by statutes and regulation related to refining, marketing, and distribution. So again, the huge bulk of that price is representing the price of crude oil as well as taxes. Well, I could argue forcefully, prevent a lot of data, that taxes on oil and gas are actually too high, but I don't expect a majority of this Senate to listen. So what we're left with as a way to impact those rising prices at the pump is to develop more, increase supply, and that brings price down worldwide. And we can do that starting right here at home. Mr. President, most Americans don't realize it because of federal policy, but the United States is the most energy-rich country in the world, bar none. When you look at all of our energy resources, certainly including oil and gas, the United States is the most energy-rich. And we're far richer, by a long shot, in terms of those total energy resources than any Middle Eastern country like Saudi Arabia. The only other country that comes close is Russia, and they're well behind. But the problem, Mr. President, is that the United States is also the only country in the world that puts about 90% of those resources off limits and says no under current federal law, under the current Obama administration lease plan. No to drilling off the East Coast. No to drilling off the West Coast. No to production of energy in the Eastern Gulf, at least as of now. No to most things offshore Alaska. No to ANWR, the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. And increasingly, this administration wants to say no and wants to put up hurdles and blockages on land where a lot of energy production is happening because of enormous shale finds and relatively new technology. And so one major thing we can do to affect the price at the pump in the right direction, to lower it, is to say yes instead of no, to develop more of our domestic energy. Unfortunately, in the last several years under President Obama, we've been moving in the opposite direction, and we've been moving away from that production. And an excellent example is the outer continental shelf. This first chart that I'll put up is the last lease plan prior to the Obama administration that was actually beginning to say yes in a significant way. This was the result of the outcry from the public, the appropriate outcry, after the summer of 2008, the last time prices at the pump spiked so significantly. And people said, wait a minute, why aren't we producing more at home? And Washington finally responded to that, and through this lease plan, we were saying yes more and more. We're saying yes, green line on the East Coast. Yes, do more in the Gulf. Yes, green light off the West Coast. Yes, do more in offshore Alaska. Unfortunately, that came to a screeching halt under the Obama administration. One of the first energy actions this administration took, President Obama and Secretary of the Interior Salazar, is to very quickly cancel this lease plan once they took office. They scrapped this. Then they studied it for quite a while with no lease plan in sight. And finally, several months ago, they announced and put forward their own lease plan, the first under the Obama administration. And what a difference an election makes. What a difference a change in administration makes. And all of a sudden, the green lights became red lights again. We reverted to the old policy of moratoria on production again. And the answer again was no, 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 no. No off the East Coast. No for now in the Eastern Gulf. No offshore Alaska. No off the West Coast. No, no, no. This plan is half as much only as the prior 5-year lease plan. So instead of moving in the positive direction, accessing more of our energy, including in the outer continental shelf, we're backing up. We're turning around. We're turning our back to the needs of the American people, and again saying no, 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 no. This amendment, Veteran Amendment number 1535, would reverse that, would say yes, would say no, this plan isn't a good idea. Let's go back to the prior 5-year lease plan. Let's develop, explore, produce in a responsible way U.S. energy. Again, we are the single most energy-rich country in the world, bar none. We have enormous resources, including offshore, including oil and gas. But we're the only country in the world that says no, 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 that puts over 90% of those resources off limits. This amendment will begin to change that. This amendment will reverse that mistaken policy. And in so doing, it would significantly increase the supply of oil where we can control it most right here at home. And when everything else stays the same, you increase supply, demand is the same, what happens? Price goes down. That's the first law of economics. So let's say yes. Let's say yes to good, reliable U.S. energy. Let's say yes to increased energy independence by doing more for ourselves right here at home. Let's say yes to great American jobs, because that's what this amendment would produce as well. Jobs which by definition can't be outsourced. You can't take good U.S. energy jobs and ship them to China or India. You can't do that by definition. Let's even say yes in this amendment to deficit and debt reduction, because this increased activity, what does it do? It produces significant federal revenue. The federal revenue or royalty on domestic energy production is the second biggest source of revenue to the federal government, second only to the federal income tax. Let's say yes. Let's do something about the rising price at the pump. Let's take control of our own destiny. Please support amendment number 1535. As I said, Mr. President, I urge all of our colleagues to support this important amendment, Democrats and Republicans. It will be the first amendment vote which we take this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The senator from California is recognized.
Mr. President, I'm going to speak against the Vitter amendment because I think it is a huge danger to our economy, and I will explain why. And it's a huge overreach by the federal government into the abilities of the states to determine if they want a recreation industry, if they want a fishing industry, if they want a tourist industry. I'll speak more about it, but before I do that, I want to let people know where we are. Thanks to the extraordinary patience of our Majority Leader, Harry Reid, today we finally have a path forward to the transportation bill. And I want to say normally I would name lots of other people. Yes, we've all been involved. But Senator Harry Reid is extraordinary. And he sat in his office last night, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. I was calling him, finding out what's happening. I was calling the great staff that he has, working with my staff and Senator Inhofe's staff, who I have grown to respect so much. Given all the issues that are facing us, we all knew that having a transportation bill is critical. And we do debate very fiercely on lots of things, and you're going to see that this morning. But when it comes to infrastructure, we have found common ground with most of our Republican friends. Now, I do want to say those who tune into this debate today are going to be a bit confused, because they're going to hear debates on amendments that really are not about highways, bridges, roads. They're not going to hear too much about that for a while. Why is that? Because the Senate is the Senate is the Senate, and we tried very hard to limit the debate to relevant amendments, but we were thwarted a couple of times. We couldn't get the 60 votes, pretty much party line. Colleagues wanted to have votes on very controversial amendments, which I do not think are going to pass, but we'll find out. And one of them is the amendment offered by Senator Vitter of Louisiana. And this amendment would essentially take the drilling plan that was released in the last few days of the Bush administration and would open up for drilling entire new areas on the Atlantic, Pacific, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and Bristol Bay. And the fact is, since that plan was offered, we have to understand that we are drilling more now than ever before. We have 4 times the number of rigs out there. We are now exporting oil. Now, does everyone agree we want more oil? I want more oil. I want it to stay in America. But I don't want to endanger entire economies by saying to our friends in the States, Uncle Sam says, forget about your fishing industry, forget about your tourist industry, forget about all the restaurants and the hotels and everybody else that depends on it. I can tell you in my state, tourism is one of the biggest industries that we have. And the beauty of our state and the beauty of our coast is what draws so many people there. And so this heavy-handed amendment says, we don't care what you think, we're going to just open up everything. Now, in 2006, this body passed the Gulf of Mexico Energy and Security Act, and I know my friend from Florida is on the floor. That act offered up 8.3 million acres for drilling in the central and eastern Gulf planning areas in exchange for protecting Florida's coast until 2022. We will see if this were to pass. Lease sales, 220, lease sale number 220 off the coast of Virginia go forward, despite concerns that this will interfere with the Navy's and NASA's activities in the region. And Vitter Amendment requires drilling in Bristol Bay, one of the world's richest fishing grounds, which supports a commercial fishery worth $2 billion a year. $2 billion a year. Now, let's be clear, America. We have 2% of the world's proven oil supplies, and we use 20% of the world's energy. So you can't drill your way out of this. What you can do, if you vote for Vitter, is maybe feel that you're doing something, but you are destroying whole areas of our nation that are so dependent upon the beauty of our coastline. On top of it all, this amendment would waive environmental review of this entire plant. No environmental review. So nobody in the country would know what lay ahead. Look, we don't need any more giveaways to big oil. They are having raging profits, even at the height of the recession, raging profits, billions of dollars. And here's the point. they're sitting on 50 million acres of onshore and offshore leases that they have yet to drill upon. Let me repeat that. Senator Vitter wants to open up huge swaths of the coastline to big oil companies who are making record profits. The price of gas is soaring, and they're sitting on 50 million acres of land, onshore and offshore leases that they have yet to drill upon. They've done nothing with more than 70% of the offshore acres and nearly 60% of the onshore acres in which they currently hold leases. So when they had a chance to bid on more lease sales, they only bid on 5 to 6% of those offshore acres in 2009 and 2010. So they're not taking advantage of the leases they hold. But Senator Vitter wants to open up huge swaths, waive all environmental review, put at risk how many jobs in California alone? 400,000 fishing and recreation, 400,000 jobs. That's larger than some of our tiny states, well, maybe a little bit smaller. I think one of our states has about 500,000. This is 400,000 jobs, folks. And we have to defeat this. You know, it's a great bumper sticker. Drill, baby, drill is a great bumper sticker. But I could write another one that says, keep the oil here in America. And they're exporting the oil. We're exporting oil. And we're going to have more of that debate when we come to the Keystone Pipeline. So here's the deal. The Vitter Amendment is a giveaway to big oil. They made a combined $137 billion in profits last year. The American consumer doesn't see a dime of savings at the pump. It would do nothing to lower gas prices. It would encourage them to continue to sit on their assets. And that's what I think this is about. They list their assets in their yearly report to their shareholders. And those assets have value. And so they just show them year after year and they never drill. So in reward for that, we're going to give them even more assets that they can brag about. I'm going to put again into facts what I said before. Domestic oil production under President Obama is up. There's 1,272 active oil rigs in the U.S. right now, more than 4 times the amount in 2009. In 2010, for the first time in 13 years, imported oil accounted for less than 50% of the oil consumed in America. Now, why is this happening? It's happening for many, many different reasons. One is we are drilling more, and we're doing it in a sensible way, not destroying areas that need to be protected and jobs that need to be protected, but in a wise way, in the regular order, in the regular process. But also we're driving more fuel-efficient vehicles, and that's extremely important because I already told you, you can't drill your way out of this mess. With only 2% of the supply, using 20% of the world's energy, it's a tilt. It's a mismatch. So we have to have more fuel-efficient cars, and of course our president led the way on that, and Detroit has rebounded because of this president and those in the Senate and House who voted to assure that they wouldn't go bankrupt. So the truth is, the Vitter Amendment is dangerous. It's very dangerous. If he wanted to come here with an amendment that had any hope of passing, in my opinion, why doesn't he go after the speculators on Wall Street who are driving up prices? The CFTC Commissioner, Bart Chilton, has calculated that consumers pay an additional $7 to $15 on each tank of gas due to oil speculation. So you want to come here and really do something that we could all support, come here with an amendment that says the oil companies should drill on the lands they already have leases on, that we are very willing to open up more acres that make sense with the understanding that that oil will stay here, we would work to stop the speculation on Wall Street that's driving up prices. And frankly, I think if we see this continued upswing in prices, my belief is we should go to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which has been done time and time again under Republican and Democratic presidents, and we've seen a salutary impact on gas prices. They go down at least, one time was 10 cents. I remember 10 cents a gallon right away. And one time, they stabilized the prices. So we've seen it happen before. That's why we have a Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So you want to come with a balanced plan, talk about how the oil companies have to drill on lands they have, how we support drilling where it makes sense and doesn't put people out of work who are in the recreation, tourism, and fishing industry. Go after the speculation on Wall Street and tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is 97% full, if it looks like we can't get a handle on these prices. Now, that's a plan in addition to which we should continue to give tax credits and tax write-offs to those people who buy fuel-efficient vehicles, and I would love to see an added benefit for those made in America. So VITR should be defeated. It's very, very controversial. It doesn't help us at all, and it would only pad the paychecks of the oil companies. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
Would the senator yield?
Senior senator from Florida is recognized.
Yes, I would.
I just want to underscore the senator from California's statement with regard to the Outer Continental Shelf and point out that the VITR amendment would allow drilling in the one place on the Outer Continental Shelf that is off limits in law, and that is the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida. And the reason that that was passed in a bipartisan way with my colleague, Senator Mel Martinez, back in 2005 is several reasons. In the first place, there is no oil out there of any appreciable amount. And the senator has already pointed out that there are 50 million acres under lease that are not drilled. Well, 30 million of those acres under lease that have not been drilled are in the Gulf of Mexico, where the oil is, in the central and western Gulf. And there's very little oil in the eastern, and gas, in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Why? Because Mother Nature had those sediments coming for millions of years down the Mississippi River, and then the Earth's crust compacted for millions of years and made that oil, and the oil is where the sediments were. It's not out there. And the oil companies know that, and that's why they have 37 million acres under lease, and only 7 million in the Gulf of Mexico are drilled, are producing of the 37 million acres. Now, that ought to be prima facie evidence of why you don't need to go in the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida. But there's more. Didn't we have some lessons from the BP oil spill 2 years ago of what happens to tourism when oil comes up on the beach? And it came very little on the Florida beaches, thank the good Lord. But the tourists thought that the beaches were covered up. And so that tourist season on our Gulf Coast beaches was a bust all the way from the Alabama-Florida line all the way down the west coast of Florida. You get down to Clearwater Beach, St. Petersburg Beach, lo and behold, they had a devastating drop-off of tourists that didn't come to those hotels and those restaurants and all of those ancillary businesses. And part of what we've been doing with the BP money is trying to make people whole for all of the income they lost. That ought to be reason enough. But there's another reason. And this is where people often are so surprised when I tell them the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida is the largest testing and training area for the United States military in the world. And this senator from Florida has 2 letters from 2 successive secretaries of state, by the way, both Republican, Secretary Rumsfeld and Secretary Gates, that says you can't put oil drilling and oil-related activities in the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida in the test and training range, which in effect is the Gulf of Mexico off of Florida. And so I just wanted to bolster the senator's statements about why we've got to vote this Vitter amendment down.
Right. I was just going to suggest that, Senator Nelson, you continue with the time because I don't need any more time at this point. So please continue.
Okay. Well, Mr. President, if I may be recognized, I want to point out that later on today we are going to have an amendment that is bipartisan. It is an amendment that of its original bill filed, there are 10 senators. 3 of them are Democrat and 7 of them are Republican. And it's called the Restore Act. And what it does is when the fine is allocated on BP because of the 5 million barrels of oil that they were spilled, the fine allocated according to the Water Pollution Act, which says that a fine will be levied upon anyone that spills a barrel of oil in public waters. And of course, because of the enormous amount of oil that was spilled, this could be a very substantial fine. 5 million barrels of oil, and once that fine is determined, then the question is, how is it going to be allocated? Well, if nothing is done, it goes into the only about $1.5 billion would go into the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, and the rest of it is undeclared. And so naturally, what the Gulf Coast senators wanted to do was to have some of that money to come back to restore the Gulf, the critters, the water, and the people who are the ones that suffered as a result of the BP oil spill. And so what we have worked out is a formula that 20% of whatever the fine is would go back to the Oil Liability Trust Fund. The remaining 80% would be allocated according to a formula advised by a National Gulf Restoration Council appointed by the states and the federal government. And it would go to make the environment of the Gulf whole, go to help with economic development along the Gulf that had suffered, and very critically to this senator, would go to help research the long-term health effects of the Gulf, because no telling, with all that oil sloshing around out there, we're already seeing just enormous effects and are going to be seeing that for years and years. For example, there are two professors down at LSU that I visited with that have been doing research on a little fish that roots around in the marshes to get its food. And so this little fish called killifish, it's about the size of a silver dollar. That little fish, they took slices of its gills, put it under a a microscope and have shown dramatic results of the fish that live in the marshes where the oil penetrated, such as Barataria Bay, where it's all mixed up down into the sediment, and then taking samples of the killifish that came from marshes where not much oil hit. And the dramatic result shows that these little fish don't reproduce. The ones that are there are stunted in their growth. They have all kinds of aberrations in their actual biological makeup, and this spells bad news for the future of the Gulf. And so we are going to have, as one of the amendments to the transportation bill, it's about 5 down on the list. Hopefully we will vote on it this afternoon, with 7 Republican senators being the sponsors of the original legislation. We are going to have this up, and I plead with the senators. If you're concerned that you don't want all of this money that is being fined as a result of the spill in the Gulf, that you want it to go elsewhere in the country, I plead for you to recognize, if you were in our shoes, what you would want. But acknowledging that you want some of the money, there is, because we had to get a pay-for, and the pay-for is it's not controversial, and yet it produces about $1.5 billion additional that can go to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The pay-for is something that the Senate has extended every year, a portion that was passed back in 2004 having to do with the World Trade Organization, a very complicated thing, and each year the Senate has put that in abeyance for another year. That's our pay-for, to put it in abeyance for the 9th year of the 10 years that this provision was to be in effect. And what it does, it produces about $1.5 billion for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, so that it will have an effect for those concerned outside of the area of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, as you know, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was right at 5 million barrels. It coated the beaches. It seeped into the wetlands. It kept fishermen at the dock during one of the busiest fishing seasons. It killed wildlife. It kept the tourists away from the Gulf. The long-term impacts are not known, because there's still a lot of oil down there at 5,000 feet on the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. The fish and the wildlife that were not immediately killed are showing the signs of damage, as I have indicated, with killifish. And the Gulf residents and the communities continue to suffer. In the United States Senate today, we have a chance to take a step to make the Gulf Coast whole again, in a sign of solidarity for the Gulf. Of the 5 Gulf Coast states that collectively have 2 Democratic senators and 8 Republican senators, all but 1 senator on those 5 states signed as a sponsor of the bill. It's bipartisan. This common sense legislation is supported by so many people out there that look at this stuff. National environmental groups, sportsmen, chambers of commerce, academic institutions, local governments, the business community. And so today's vote is going to be a huge step toward making sure that the fine that's going to be imposed upon BP, however much it is, ends up in the local communities that were harmed by BP's oil spill. Otherwise, the money is going to end up in the federal treasury, and there's no telling then where it's going to be spent. So the Restore Act amendment provides funding to each Gulf state for ecosystem restoration and economic recovery. It also creates a federal state council responsible for developing and executing a holistic plan to increase the resiliency of the Gulf ecosystem. You've seen why were baby dolphins dying? We don't know in record numbers. We've got to find out, and we've got to test these results for years to come. The amendment is also going to ensure that each Gulf state would come up with a state plan that's consistent with the federal state council plan. And finally, this bill sets aside funding for science, specifically dedicating funding for data collection, for our fisheries, for our wildlife, for long-term observation and monitoring, and sets up centers of excellence to carry out the research on the Gulf for years to come. But there's also a national component to this bill. It creates and sets aside the funding for an endowment for the oceans, an endowment for the Great Lakes, so that in addition to restoring the Gulf where the harm occurred, we can better protect all of our coasts from environmental harm. And it provides substantial investments in the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which I mentioned, which protects and conserves land in each and every state in this union. I believe that our people, the whole of America, deserve a healthy and productive Gulf, and the civil fines that are going to be assessed to BP are a place that can ensure that. I'd like to share with my colleagues a vision for a restored Gulf of Mexico. One of the lessons that we learned, and we learned it too late, is that we do not have sufficient understanding of the Gulf ecosystem. We know that 1/3 of our domestic seafood comes from the Gulf waters. But we didn't have a clear picture on the biological status of 2/3 of the federally managed fish stocks that call the Gulf home. So it's important that some of these fines go toward dedicated long-term science about the Gulf ecosystem. That was one of the main things that I wanted to get into the Restore Act because of the obvious implications for the long term in the future. A restored Gulf is one in which clean water that's free from algae blooms and free from tar balls is home to oyster reefs and fish habitat and seagrass beds where charters ferry tourists from hotels to pristine beaches and then on out to the productive fishing spots. And an integral part of the restoration is to shore up the coastal communities that were hardest hit by the economic impacts of the oil spill. And it's going to take a substantial investment to achieve those goals. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the Gulf cannot wait. The rigid partisanship that has sometimes gridlocked this body has given way to a spirit of strong collaboration and bipartisanship in this Senate when it comes to the Restore Act. I want to thank all the co-sponsors of the amendment and the co-sponsors of the Restore Act. And I would plead with our colleagues to support this amendment. It's the right thing to do for the Gulf. It's the right thing to do for the country. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Just 1 second. I'll call up my amendment 1822, which is at the desk, and ask that it be reported by number.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Florida, Mr. Nelson, for himself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 1822.
I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Maine is recognized.
Mr. President, I call up my amendment number 1660, which is at the desk, and ask that it be reported by number.
Clerk will report.
The senator from Maine, Ms. Collins, for herself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 1660.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to offer the EPA Regulatory Relief Act, which is Amendment 1660, to the Highway Reauthorization Bill. I'm very pleased to have Senator Alexander, Senator Pryor, Senator Toomey, Senator Landrieu, and Senator McCaskill joining me as co-sponsors of this amendment. Mr. President, last year I introduced legislation very similar to this amendment to provide the EPA with the time that the agency itself says that it needed to rewrite the proposed Boiler MAC rules to better serve the public interest and to protect vulnerable manufacturing jobs. The legislation had the support of 41 of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and an identical bill, nearly identical bill, passed the House of Representatives with broad bipartisan support this fall. The EPA Regulatory Relief Act is straightforward. It will help ensure that the final Boiler MAC regulations will be achievable and affordable, and that manufacturers will have adequate time to bring their facilities into compliance, thus preserving jobs. Mr. President, we hear over and over again that the top priority of the Senate should be to create an environment where jobs are created and preserved. Well, this, Mr. President, this amendment is all about saving jobs. Since the EPA proposed these new Boiler MAC regulations in April of 2010, there has been widespread bipartisan alarm over the cost of the implementation and potential job losses. It has been our shared goal to ensure that the final rules crafted by the EPA protect public health and the environment while preventing the loss of thousands of jobs that we can ill afford to lose. Enactment of this legislation is necessary to protect and to grow America's manufacturing workforce. This is all about jobs. We have urged the EPA to set emission standards based on real-world capabilities of the best-performing boilers currently available. After all, that's what Boiler MAC is supposed to be all about. Unfortunately, the EPA did not begin its rulemaking with that goal in mind, and the consequences are so serious. The forest products industry is the lifeblood of many small rural communities in my state of Maine and many others. I was, therefore, and remain alarmed by a study commissioned by the American Forest and Paper Association, which found that implementing the EPA rules as originally drafted could cause 36 pulp and paper mills around the country to close, putting more than 20,000 Americans out of work. That is 18% of the workforce in just this one manufacturing sector. Now, Mr. President, you may have heard that the EPA has revised its rules, and it has. But despite these revisions, the Boiler MAC rules remain an issue of great concern to manufacturers across the country and to many of my constituents. With the reconsideration process, the EPA has taken some initial steps, but they are not even close to sufficient. The agency's re-proposed rules still do not address the serious and real threat to factories and mills that will be most directly affected. The revised rules, Mr. President, are still estimated to cost billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. Regions across this nation already struggling with the decline in manufacturing would be the hardest hit. Furthermore, a recent court ruling has created even more uncertainty and confusion and has increased the pressure on EPA to just rush through these rules without careful consideration. Legislative action is needed to ensure achievable and affordable rules to allow adequate compliance time and to reduce the risk to industries posed by the pending litigation, which has created so much uncertainty that manufacturers are telling me they are putting any job expansions on hold. Enactment of the EPA Regulatory Relief Act remains the best way to provide the time that the EPA itself says is needed to develop and implement Boiler MAC rules that will deliver the intended benefits to public health and our environment without devastating our economy. There's no need for a choice here. It's not the environment versus jobs. With carefully crafted regulations, we can protect the environment and preserve jobs. There are several factors that reinforce the continuing need for this legislation. First, the overall capital cost to manufacturers of the Boiler MAC rules remain a staggering $14 billion and threaten more than 200,000 critically needed good jobs. Think about that, Mr. President. The revised rules have an estimated cost of $14 billion and 200,000 jobs that would be lost. Second, following the January 9th court decision that overturned the EPA's stay of the March 2011 rules, and this was a stay that the EPA, to its credit, requested, but unfortunately was denied, businesses are facing serious and ongoing legal and regulatory uncertainty. Third, the revised rules still do not allow companies adequate time to comply with the new standards and install the required equipment. Fourth, important biomass materials are still not listed as fuels. That makes no sense at all. We're trying to reduce the use of fossil fuels. We should be encouraging the use of biomass in boilers. And in fact, the Department of Energy is doing just that, while the EPA is doing the opposite through these rules. It makes no sense to force mills to use fossil fuels while landfilling renewable biomass materials. That makes no sense whatsoever. Finally, the EPA's current schedule for finalizing the rules is inadequate for fully analyzing the comments and data that will be received during the comment period. And the EPA itself recognizes that. That's why it asked for the stay. So, Mr. President, I would ask of my colleagues, do not be deceived by the EPA's hollow promises that somehow, some way, everything will be fixed and that we no longer or that we don't need this legislation. The fact is that the EPA regulations are a moving target. Who knows what they ultimately will propose? The biomass boilers, some of the materials are still being considered as solid waste and treated as an incinerator with far more costly and onerous regulations, biomass. But then again, this is the same EPA that initially proposed that we no longer treat biomass and wood as carbon neutral, overturning years of treating wood as carbon neutral. That made no sense either. Under tremendous pressure, the EPA finally backed off on that for 3 years. But we don't know what's going to happen. Now, let me say, Mr. President, that the EPA does perform some vital functions in helping to protect public health by ensuring that the air we breathe is clean and the water we drink is safe. And I've opposed many attempts to delay or overturn EPA regulations. But we need to make sure that as EPA issues new regulations, it does not create so many roadblocks to economic growth that it discourages private investment, which is the key to maintaining and creating jobs. We need to make sure that EPA both protects the environment and protects our economy and does not impose billions of dollars on new costs on manufacturers, leading to an estimated loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs in manufacturing at a time when our economy can least afford it and when there are alternatives. I'm not saying that there should not be Boiler-MAC regulations. I'm saying we need more time for EPA to get it right, to work with industry, to get real-life emission standards. I'm saying that we need more time for compliance so that we're not imposing these huge costs at a time when our manufacturers are struggling and thus jeopardizing jobs. Mr. President, a coalition of 380 companies and organizations, I don't think I've ever offered an amendment with more support and which has so many companies so upset about what this is going to do to the much-needed jobs that they're providing, endorsing a proposal. 380 companies and organizations, including the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the American Forest and Paper Association, those are just a few of the 380, have called for passage of my amendment. The members of this coalition are committed to working with EPA, to being good stewards, and to supporting the development and implementation of achievable Boiler-MAC rules, not rules that don't classify biomass, that force people to use fossil fuels instead of biomass. How is that good for our environment? It is essential that the EPA produce final rules that are guided by the same commitment. The EPA is making progress in reducing the costs and coming up with a more practical approach to the Boiler-Mac rules. But we have no idea where they're going to end up. They're a moving target, and we've had promises not fulfilled by the EPA before. I believe that we can achieve the health benefits that we all desire. And I know we're going to hear on the floor that somehow I'm trying to harm children or delay health benefits. And that's not true, Mr. President. I'm trying to allow the time that the EPA itself says is needed to get this right. We can achieve health benefits that we desire without putting thousands of people out of work and stifling the economic recovery. The bipartisan amendment that is before us will help ensure that result, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this common sense amendment to preserve jobs and strengthen